Hello, and welcome to the Diversity Rocks podcast. My name is Liz Critchley, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a white woman who is now 50. I've got blonde hair and a fringe, and I'm wearing dark rimmed glasses and a black t-shirt today. It's great to have you here. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Ione Georgakis. Hi, Ione.
Hi Liz, thanks for having me.
Very welcome, very welcome. So, delighted to have Ione to join today. As you're probably aware by now, our mission at Orange Orchid, our vision at Orange Orchid is we are striving for everyone at work and in society to feel like they belong. And we also like to disrupt the system. And I was delighted when I met Ione at a recent conference that we were both at. I was really pleased that she agreed to come on because Ione has a fantastic story to tell, and I think some really great hints and tips for us all to increase our understanding of Tourette's. So Ione, the first question I always ask, tell us about your origin story. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Love that. It makes me feel like a superhero.
Yeah, you are.
And what an origin story, eh? So I suppose I've been living with Tourette's my whole life. I've had tics since a very, very young age, probably about 6 or 7, very small movement tics that have been a kind of, familiar part of my life since, for as long as I can remember, really. My mum had tics when she was a child, and they were her rolling twitches in a generation and a time that I suppose Tourette's, we didn't really have a term for Tourette's, or it wasn't so widely considered. So in my house, tics were quite normalized, really. We didn't have to give them much attention. We certainly didn't explore getting a diagnosis because it didn't have an impact on what I wanted and needed to do. But as I got older and that changed and the tics became more noticeable and other people were pointing them out, and they maybe became more impactful on my life, more distracting, more painful, then we explored a diagnosis. So I was eventually diagnosed with Tourette's in my late teens, but I also have ADHD and I'm dyslexic. I got a few areas of neurodiversity going on in this noggin of mine. But I have been, really lucky to have understood my conditions and to be a part of a system that gets it, I suppose. And I've been able to use that kind of support and that acceptance and understanding to take my lived experience of disability and kind of embed it into my role and my job and my life, which I think is a real privilege.
And tell us a bit more about your role then.
So that's a good point there, Liz. So I'm an occupational therapist professionally by background, and I work part-time in the NHS. I work in mental health services, but I also work for Tourette's Action, and Tourette's Action are the UK's leading research and support charity for people living with tics and Tourette's, and we support them individually and directly, but we also support the systems around them, like their educators, their parents, their employers, anyone who will listen to us, really. And I have been working with them for about 5 years now, and I am their therapies and advocacy manager. So I create and lead a lot of their training sessions for employers, for healthcare professionals, businesses, organisations, public services. And I also work one-to-one with adults with Tourette's who are looking to access or remain in employment, or who need a little bit of extra support with well-being. And another part of my role, which is a kind of an emerging and slightly new aspect, is working alongside people's employers to help them to understand what reasonable adjustments might need to be implemented, and training their team to enable people to kind of more confidently be themselves in the workplace, which I think is absolutely key to workplace well-being and sustainable practice. So that's my kind of job with TA in a nutshell, and I absolutely adore it. It's such a privilege to be able to use that lived experience, but directly work with people living with Tourette's. And our kind of hope as a charity is always to sort of bridge that gap between the lack of statutory services, kind of making sure that people who are living with tics and Tourette's have support and connection and a community, even if they're unlikely to receive kind of ongoing formal medical care for their diagnosis. And I think we do it quite well.
Yeah, you're a brilliant organisation. I know from the talk that you did at the event that we were both at, I learned so much. And I think there's lots of people that perhaps don't realise that Tourette's is part of a neurodivergent condition in the same way you mentioned, autism, ADHD, dyslexia. I think probably the awareness of Tourette's is increasing. People are more aware of it now. I think people are more aware that it's more than perhaps just the swearing stereotype that people have got. But it is, of course, on that spectrum of neurodivergence, along with some of those other conditions, isn't it?
It does. It sits under that kind of term of neurodiversity, that umbrella term. And I think that historically it's been misunderstood as being a psychiatric condition or a
Mhm.
behavioural condition. And it isn't. It really falls under that bracket. And what I think something that people don't recognise about Tourette's is how commonly it co-occurs with other conditions. So
Mhm.
as I like to say, Tourette's loves company. So around
Okay.
90% of people with Tourette's, they've got something else going on. All right.
Yeah.
It's a Pokemon, got to catch them all. ADHD, OCD, autism, anxiety, sleep difficulties, pain. Pain is a really almost a universal experience of Tourette. So it's,
Yeah, t tell us a bit more about that because that was something I hadn't even thought about until I heard you speak, that pain element. Tell us a bit more about that.
yeah. And do you know what, Liz? I think you're in good company there, because it's the most common feedback we get from sessions is people go, my God, I did not think about the pain side of things. And that's from professionals, but really importantly, it's from parents.
Hmm.
Actually, I never considered this. So research shows us that pain is a really, really common experience in tics and Tourette's. I think up to 98% of people with Tourette's report quite significant pain and injury from their tics. And that ranges from frequent headaches because of eye rolling tics or sort of neck jerking tics, to jaw pain, to broken bones and significant kind of bruising and long-term injury. And I use this comparison around the idea of a slightly dubious comparison here, but tennis elbow. Okay, so it's an
Okay. Yeah,
injury,
yeah, makes
right?
sense.
Give me a bit of tennis elbow. So it's an injury. It occurs through a repetitive movement done throughout the course of a person's life. If you're like a professional tennis player, you're maybe training, a few hours a day, 5 days a week, maybe more. And yeah, so that can cause that injury. If you've been living with Tourette's and you've got this kind of tick in your arm, tick in your jaw, tick in your head, you could have been doing that for hundreds of times a day, every
Yeah.
day from the age of 6 up to 60. And it's this kind of this accumulative damage. It's the overuse of muscles, it's the repetitive use of muscles. Tourette's does not respect your range of movement. Tourette's doesn't respect your energy levels, your pain capacity. It doesn't, allow you to rest. In fact, when we're in pain in a body part, we focus more on that body part. And when you're living with Tourette's and you're focusing more on a certain body part or a certain sensation, you're bringing attention to it. And in doing so, you're more likely to tick there. So it can fall into such a tricky, exhausting cycle.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not funny.
No.
Essentially chronic pain is not funny. And Tourette's historically is a condition that's really associated with humour. It's the punchline of people's jokes. It's misrepresented in the media. We've had politicians use it as a kind of a fleeting statement. It's won jokes at festivals,
Mm.
Tourette's jokes. So it's so regularly used as a punchline. But when we step back and we look at the impact and the statistics of living with it, it becomes a lot less amusing. And I think that that's something that's really important to get out there. It's people with Tourette's might find joy and laughter and positivity in their diagnosis, and as is their privilege. And thank God there's some joy and laughter and light in there
Hmm.
for lots of people. But if that's the external communal narrative around the condition, that it's something to be laughed at, then it completely kind of invalidates just how hard it is living with it day to day. And I think that that's, yeah, something that we really wanted to get out there. Last year, our Tourette's campaign was all about, Tourette's, it hurts, and you
Yeah.
can't see it, to the outside world, but living with those movements and how frequent they are can be really, really tough.
So let's bust some of those myths then, because you're right, there is a stereotype, isn't there, unfortunately, out there, and which is why it's so important for us to have conversations like these to bust some of those myths. But um, tell us, from your lived experience, what do people expect Tourette's to be, and what is it actually?
Good question. And I suppose I've got to start with the big one here. Tourette's is the swearing condition.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
90% of people I'll say, oh, I've got Tourette's. They go, oh my God, do you swear? And I'll go, oh my God, yeah, but it's not related to my condition. It's
Yeah.
related to my personality and my excitability and how I communicate. And in Tourette's, we call this feature of the condition coprolalia. So it's essentially sort of like poo talk, or inappropriate words and phrases. So we've got
Yeah.
coprolalia, which is the verbal side, and copropraxia, which is the physical side, so giving the middle finger, etc.
Yeah.
And this kind of part of the condition it makes up for 100% of what we see on our TV and in the
Hmm.
media. It's the shock factor. It engages people's curiosity and humour. But actually, it impacts a minority of the Tourette's community. Around 15 to 20% of people with Tourette's will experience these swearing symptoms. For lots of people, it's not a permanent symptom. I think it's really important that we highlight this side of the diagnosis because, my God, it's probably one of the hardest symptoms to live with. It causes the biggest barriers to employment and education and well-being. It disproportionately impacts people with the more severe Tourette's. So, people who have these symptoms are statistically more likely to have more frequent tics. They're also more likely to have more co-occurring conditions. So, yeah, it's a cohort of people for whom life is very, very challenging or can be challenging. But if we only represent this one portion of tics and Tourette's, then we are not giving voice to the whole experience and the spectrum of kind of the complexity and the beautiful diversity of this diagnosis. It's kind of that outdated idea, historically we thought autism and Rain Man, we had this very specific,
Yeah.
quite extreme depiction of what autism could look like. And, in my generation, it was Tourette's Pete from Big Brother. Good old Pete Bennett, and he did amazing
Of
work for the
course,
Tourette
yeah.
community. He brought so much awareness. What an awesome character, how much life he brought. But it can become a barrier to diagnosis for so many people. I certainly, growing up, didn't have a language for what my sounds and movements and my habits were. And
Yeah.
I looked at these kind of bigger characters, and I'd never have connected their experience with mine because I didn't have this one kind of swearing symptom. And the myth that this is what Tourette's is so pervasive. We see it in medical communities. We have people who go to their GP and the GP says, "Oh, don't worry, little Johnny can't have Tourette's. He's not swearing." No, 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 no. And it just highlights to us just how kind of, how ingrained this myth around the condition is. And it sort of it stigmatizes it more and it misrepresents it more. So it's important we give voice to the swearing, but remember, it's not everything. And
Yeah.
sometimes we might just choose to swear to express
Yeah.
ourselves. Not related to our
No,
condition.
you've just really annoyed me. I'm going to swear at you now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And what can be done? So when I've spoken to lots of different neurodivergent folk, there is this conversation about medical diagnosis versus I just live my life in a different way. And I guess because it's a spectrum, Tourette's is the same as other neurodivergent conditions in that symptoms or traits might be quite mild or they might be quite severe. So I guess what I'm getting at here is what's your view on that? And is there anything that can be done to limit some of the traits with Tourette's? I don't want to use the word treatment as such, but is there things, if people want it, that can help? And I guess particularly with the pain, that's useful. I just wondered what your view was on is it a medical diagnosis or is it just a way of life? And is this anything that can be done to limit some of the impacts?
Great question. And I think it's a really tricky one. And as you kind of highlighted, it's very individual and it's a
Yeah,
personal choice. I think there are lots of barriers to being diagnosed with Tourette's. Tourette syndrome hasn't got NICE guidelines, so there's no kind of really formal embedded structure to support the assessment and diagnosis and treatment of this condition. When we think of neurodiversity, Tourette's is kind of the underdog. We have these
yeah,
specialist neurodiversity services across the country. Yes, there's an 8-year wait list, but they do exist. Most of those services focus on ADHD and autism. So for lots of people, if they do get diagnosed, it's almost a backdoor approach. They've gone in for their ADHD assessment, the assessor's noticed some tics, they've asked a few questions around that, and maybe they've had the diagnosis. It is a medical diagnosis, and I do think it benefits people having that form of diagnosis. I'm slightly biased, but I think a diagnosis is not about a label, it's about
yeah,
identity and community and the ability to self-advocate. I remember the shame and the shutdown I'd feel in my kind of late teens when people would say, "What's that noise you're doing?" And I'd go, "What noise?" Because it was happening so automatically, clearing air out the back of my nose, which probably to other people sounds horrible. It probably triggers that like, ugh, in you. But actually, I didn't know what to say. And I'd just kind of become embarrassed and try and become hyper aware to stop those movements. If I had a language, I could say, oh, it's a tic, it's an involuntary thing. I don't even know
Yeah.
I'm doing it. If you ignore it, it's more likely to sort of go away. So can we just but I didn't have that. So I think that not only does getting a formal diagnosis give you a language and the ability to advocate, but it does also give you access to your community and to medical and therapy options. So like you said, Tourette's really varies from person to person and how it looks from person to person. But if you get that diagnosis, then you do have the option to access medical treatment. So there are medical medicines available to treat Tourette's. They're all sort of off license, so they're designed for other
Yeah.
conditions, but they found to be impactful for Tourette's. There's also therapy approaches, behavioural therapy approaches, which can support people to either build their capacity to sort of tolerate their tic urges and kind of hold them in for periods of time in order to do what they want and need to do, or what we call habit reversal therapy. So that's where we teach someone a competing response, an alternative movement or sound other than their tic, which is less painful or embarrassing or noticeable for them. And so that's kind of they're I guess the treatment options for tics and Tourette's. Just because they exist, it doesn't mean that they're perfect.
Yeah.
It also doesn't mean that they're easily and readily available to most people. So I think about 70% of people with Tourette's, they're diagnosed and they're discharged in one appointment. So most people living with this condition aren't accessing ongoing treatment. Lots of people don't need to, don't want to. Their tics are at a certain level. They might increase at periods of stress or excitement, but they're kind of quite manageable. On the other end of that, we've got people who can't independently live, they can't drive, they can't eat, they struggle to communicate, they stop leaving their house because their tics are so severe and they have such a big social impact that they just don't feel kind of safe to do these things. So it's really important that there's treatment for tics, but we've got to recognise it's not going to work or align for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to be everyone's choice because I guess, as we know, all treatments for all conditions, they kind of, it almost sort of places the burden of change on that person, and the underlying message is that, you know, you need to tic less to be okay. And for some people that is the case. They don't feel safe, they're in too much pain, they can't do what they want and need to. And for other people, they absolutely can. So I guess it's, yeah, it's always taking a step back and trying to just look at the individual in that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned just about people's reaction. So help us out here. If we've never met somebody with Tourette's before, and we might not even know, I guess, you know, I knew because I was at a conference and you were talking about Tourette's and you talked about your story. But if we'd have met in a different networking environment or a conference, and I perhaps wasn't aware of Tourette's, and I thought, oh, Ione's making these strange moves, you know, what can I do to make, what's your preference? What can I do to make you as comfortable as possible? What help me out?
Yeah, I mean that is the $1 million question,
Yeah.
isn't it, Liz? And to be honest, everyone is going to be slightly different. I mean, the general rule is ignore tics, let them
Hmm.
be. If something feels out of context and you're not sure what's going on, does it need a response?
Hmm.
Probably not. The challenge comes when the tics are slightly more disruptive or they do warrant a response. So, and sometimes you don't know. So you're like, is this person being wildly inappropriate? Has this person forgot to mute their phone? Do I need to just go, could you put your phone on silent?
Yeah.
Actually, when you ask that, what you'd find out is it's not my phone, it's my mouth. Yeah.
Okay.
So the
Yeah.
amount of times someone's gone, whose ringtone is that? And I'm going, it's me. I'm the ringtone. I can't turn myself on silent.
Yeah.
Some people are going to walk into a space and go, by the way, I've got Tourette's. This is what's going on. They're going to get ahead of the game. So if I'm in any kind of communal environment, I'm about maybe a workshop, that sort of thing, I'll generally try and get ahead of the confusion. And I'll
Yeah.
say, just to let you know, I've got Tourette's. This is what it means. And in doing so, I give everyone permission to ignore it,
Okay.
accept it.
Yeah.
Or in certain situations, maybe gently respond with a smile or a little something. It's okay
Mhm.
to acknowledge the tics are happening. We don't have to be robo-cops about it and just completely it's not there. But tics, like everything else in the world, they respond to positive and negative attention. It's not a conscious thing, but our brains and bodies do that. So if we're drawing a lot of attention, if we're looking every time someone makes a noise, we're going to make them more self-conscious, more aware, and they're likely to tic more. So,
More. Yeah. That's
you
really useful.
know, but there are going to be situations that you're going to go, sorry, was that a tic, or are you
Yeah.
going to burn the building down? You know, is that a threat? Is that a promise? Is it involuntary? Let's just clarify. I don't think most people don't ask people don't mind people asking, but it's the kind of assumption, the
Yes.
assumption that you can blindly ask someone really intrusive personal questions, or that assumption that we must just pretend this isn't happening. And actually,
Yeah.
it is happening, and it's going to make us smile. It's going to feel a bit out of context. It's going to raise some thoughts and feelings, and that's okay, as long as the person feels, yeah, safe to be themselves.
Yeah, and I guess it's about having that genuine, authentic conversation, isn't it? Between, if something's going on and you think, oh gosh, is that person okay? Maybe aware of, are you okay? Do you need anything? And then that might be the question that prompts someone to say, oh, I have Tourette's, it's tics. It's fine. Would can we just carry on? And then okay, right, that's fine then. And how, so it makes me think about. Tell me about your education. What was going through school like having Tourette's? Because
Mm.
sometimes kids are horrible.
Sometimes kids are horrible. My education journey was a bit of a wild one. I struggled quite a lot in school. I obviously I didn't have that formal official Tourette
Yeah,
diagnosis for some years, but I did have an ADHD and dyslexia diagnosis alongside a lot of challenging behaviours. I really sought to retake control of my environment by being the class clown, by being kind of, I guess I controlled the things that I could control, and that
yeah,
hid some of the things that I couldn't. But it did make school a really difficult place for me. I was in trouble a lot. I was removed from classes a lot. I socially did quite well. I had friends who could be quite playful and silly, but I wasn't there very often. I think my attendance throughout my GCSEs and A levels was 48%. So I worked I worked a lot from home in spaces that worked for me. Um, and I survived and I got my
yeah. Here you
GCSEs and I
are.
got
Yeah.
my A levels and I'm still standing. But it was a really difficult time. And I would say it's probably a time I had to recover from. The
Yes, I
things
bet.
I learned, the corrections, the get out the classroom, who made that noise, why did you chuck that glue stick? And I didn't have a language to explain why that happened. And so kind of it was easier to rebel than not. And I took really quite a long break after I finished sixth form before I went and did my undergraduate degree. And I would not have succeeded in my undergraduate degree had I not taken that break. It was essential to me, and I went back into university. And my God, it was not a smooth sailing, easy peasy pudding and pie, but it was slightly easier. I did have a language for what was going on for me. But I'll always remember my first day at uni. I had emailed the course. I'd asked them to send an email out to all of the students in order to prevent any social misunderstandings. I offered to write the email myself, and I arrived and it hadn't happened. And so I'm sat
Oh,
in an lecture theatre of, 100 people. I'm super anxious. I'm ticking a lot. And a good friend of mine who, I'd met maybe a few days after that said to me, I was sat at the front of the lecture hall and I was enraged. I thought, who the hell is wolf whistling and objectifying this beautiful young lecturer every time she walks on the stage? And whose ringtone, text tone, is a cat and they won't turn it on silent? And she's sitting at the front of this hall and she's getting absolutely outraged on behalf of the other students and the teachers. And the person next to her goes, I'm pretty sure someone in here's got Tourette's. I think that's what's going on. And she went, I felt awful. I said, you don't need to feel awful. But it is an example of the micro misunderstandings, or what could have been quite a big misunderstanding and conflict that happen when we don't implement what is incredibly reasonable adjustments.
yeah,
Send an email out to a team, sending an email out to a course saying, self-written, this is me, this is my condition, this is how it presents, feel free to ask me, or don't feel free to ask me. That takes 5 minutes and is free and quick and easy and makes a world of difference. When those things don't happen at the right time, it gives people things that they have to recover from. It gives
yeah,
people negative, anxiety-provoking experiences that pop back up every time we re-enter that space or think about trying to do that thing again. So it's not always easy, but I guess in that story, I'm trying to highlight that there are some super easy things that we can do to make those challenging environments and situations a little bit safer,
yeah.
more enjoyable.
And that's so disappointing to hear because, like you say, that is, you'd offer to write the email for them. It's free, you had given them permission to say, here's some words, can you please email it out to everybody? At that point, it's the start of the term. They surely have got a big long list of everyone that's going to be there. That's not a difficult thing you've asked them to do, and they've let you down effectively for doing that. And what's it like going into work then? So once you got through the education system, does it change when you go into the workplace? Is it different?
I I think I've been quite lucky with my experience of work from kind of, yeah, from my late teens right up and right to present day. I've worked often in health and social care roles.
Yeah.
And I've always been surrounded by teams who get it, who embrace it, who
Hmm.
find quite a lot of joy and connection in it. People tend to have quite a good sense of humor and be quite open and receptive. I have faced a few moments of kind of confusion or misunderstandings, generally from external visitors entering the
Okay.
space that I'm working in. But don't get me wrong, my tics have brought a lot of joy and laughter and social connection to me and my colleagues. I have a wolf whistling tic. I've had it for years, and people just go, I love it. I walk into the office, you wolf whistle, and I just feel good about myself. It's just this tiny little check-in. And yeah, so I have been really lucky, and I do work in a role that supports me to be slightly more comfortable to advocate for myself.
Hmm.
But there are challenges. I'm a therapist. I work directly with children and young people who are going through a really, really difficult time. And there are times in my job role where I have to work quite hard to suppress or to hold in my tics. Now, I'm really lucky. I'm a tic therapist. I'm trained in tic therapies. And because I've done that work, I can apply lots of those strategies to myself. And I can often hold in my tics for, probably up to half an hour, sometimes an hour, with a lot of focus and attention. Um, so there's certain interactions in work that I'll have to work really hard to hold in those tics, but for me it's worth it because I'm doing that for client safety or well-being, to create a space where they can share their experience. If someone externally was telling me I needed to do that, or, worse, they were telling me within meetings, you need to hold those tics in. When we're doing parent contacts, you need to hold those tics in. That would be different.
Yeah.
No one has externally asked me to do that. I'm choosing to use that resource in my toolkit, in the same way that we try not to yawn if we were having a really
Yeah.
personal conversation with someone. We'd hold, swallow it, swallow the yawn, don't insult them. You're not bored. I swallow those tics and I hold them in to make sure that interaction isn't impacted. But that's a personal choice, and it's
Yeah. And how does that sounds exhausting. What's the impact of holding those ticks in for that half an hour and it's really important what you say, that's something you've chosen to do in that particular situation. But I would imagine that's quite an exhausting thing to do, that you have to think about quite hard to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's mentally and it's physically exhausting, and it definitely impacts how present I am. I think, research shows that it can really impact, suppression, holding in your tics can really impact your focus and your attention and your ability to learn and retain information. So especially if I'm working with teachers and things like that, I'll always say, if you want the best from a student, let them tick, let them
Yeah.
express what they want and need to, let them be regulated and present, and then carry on, because the tics are often a lot less distracting than the act of trying to hold in the tick.
Mm.
I'll use the analogy of trying not to blink. And if you're
Mm.
doing that for a period of time, the longer it goes on, the bigger the pressure behind your eyes is, the more aware you become, the less engaged in the interaction you are. And eventually you're just going to blink,
Yeah. I
And
blinked like twice as fast as I normally would just since you said that.
yeah, and that's
I'm
another
like, oh God.
argument, isn't it? It's like the more someone tells you not to do something, the more
Yeah.
you're focusing on it, and therefore the risk is that the more you're going to do it. And everyone is different. I work with people who can hold their tics in for a few seconds at a time. I work with people who can hold their tics in for hours at a time. But it's very, very individual, and it's a choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if you don't mind, one of the I'm just going to ask you, because when we were setting this call up, you specifically said to me, "Do you mind if we do it in the morning?" Tell me a little bit more about why you asked that, and why it's important for me to pay attention to that.
Listen up, Liz. No, thank you. It's a thing that I always request. Everyone with tics and Tourette's is different and unique, and it also, I guess, there's a factor of my ADHD in there. I'm a morning person. I function best in the morning. My tics are less severe in the morning. I've given a little bit less of myself out as I continue through the day. I've spoken more. I've maybe become more sensorily dysregulated. I've not had opportunities to move, and my tics just naturally increase as the day goes on. Tics wax and wane. That's a part of the condition of Tourette's. They're very rarely at the same level all the time.
Mm.
Waxing and waning can happen over the course of kind of weeks or months, but it can also, there can be sort of micro changes in the day. So a lot of kids I work with, by the end of the school day, they've managed to kind of hold it in quite a lot. The end
Mm,
of the school day, when they get home, big explosion of energy and frustration and sensory differences and tics. But in the morning in schools, they're doing quite well. And I'm the same. In the morning, I can focus better. My tics are less severe. By the end of the day, my tics are more present. My brain's a bit more fuzzy. My word finding ability is gone. My focus is worse. And maybe my pain increases as the day goes on, as the movements have built and I haven't had that sleep reset. God bless
yeah,
sleep helps everything, doesn't it?
yeah,
Um, and so everyone is different, and it's really, really important that we listen to people and honor that, because actually the time of day that we do something is generally like the lowest level of reasonable adjustment, and it can change so much. So, I, in my work day, will always do my client contacts in the morning or my training sessions on the first half of the day, and admin in the
hmm,
afternoon when I can stretch and wiggle and be at home in my pajamas if I need to. I can kind of regulate myself more. I don't have to be people facing and pleased. And it's free and it's simple. And it applies in work, but it also applies in like medical settings, education settings. If you are working with someone, get curious. When works best for you?
yeah,
What do you need? And actually, it might be the opposite. If it was a young person, they might say, yeah, my tics are less severe in the day. I'm not wasting my tick-free time on you. I'm
yeah,
wasting it at school. We can do the appointment at the end of the day when I'm absolute chaos, but that doesn't matter so much to me. So
yeah,
there's always going to be an individual kind of level of choice in there. And if I was doing therapy with someone, I'd want to know, what time of the day are you going to be most able to access the therapy? What have you got after today's session? Are you about to think about all your tics, increase all your tics, and then go back into school and you've got history and geography, which are your two worst subjects? We're setting you and Mr. Johnson up to fail here.
yeah.
So actually, let's do it at 3 p.m. Let's do it at 9 a.m. Just ask.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And that for me is that importance of curiosity, of getting to know people on an individual level. And from my perspective, it doesn't matter why somebody's asking that. If somebody's asking you for something, there's a reason behind it. And if you know them well and you want to build a relationship with them and they're happy to talk about it, then that's brilliant. But actually, someone's asking for something that's a really reasonable request. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you accommodate that?
Absolutely. It's not easy to ask, is it? By the time
No.
someone's asked, I always think, what 5 invisible processes and hype talk did you have to go through to be able to feel even safe enough to ask for that? So,
Yeah.
yeah, couldn't agree more.
And I think that's where, so if we think about it from an employer's perspective, that's where being proactive and offering different options is really powerful, because actually if every meeting you're having, or say it's an interview, somebody's coming for a job interview, they're going to be more nervous anyway, which I'm guessing kind of enhances the likelihood of those tics to come through. But actually if you're prepping for an interview, saying to somebody, what would help you get us for us to get the best out of this interview? Is there a specific time of day? Would you like to come to the premises beforehand so you can have a look around? Is there anything from a lighting or a sound perspective? Kind of almost giving them that list of, here are things that are really easy for us to control, and I'm giving you a little list so it makes it easier for you to go, actually, now you've said that, yes, if I could come the day before just to familiarize myself, and if we could do it in the morning, that would be perfect. And then you're not just leaving that empty space for them to say, right, I'm gonna ask now, I'm gonna pluck up the courage and ask for something, and will that impact on their opinion of me? Will it impact me getting the job? They've kind of just put it out there, and you're asking that to everybody that's coming, and that makes it a bit more straightforward.
Oh God, that's the dream, Liz. I don't know what I'd do if I went to an interview and that happened. I'd faint, it would probably undo my chance of getting the job. But just the power of overtly offering, this is what we can do. There's no judgment. This is a universal offer to anyone accessing this space, because it's so hard to ask for what you need. I have advocate in my job title, and I struggle to advocate
Yeah.
for myself in those environments. We can understand their impact on others and their benefit, but it's so hard to ask and give ourselves permission. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that would just be such a dream in recruitment, wouldn't it?
Yes. We'll get that out there. The message, we're spreading the message, Ione. So tell us about, kind of, has Tourette's brought you any specific strengths or unique perspectives. You're very personable. You've mentioned humour quite a few times. I know, in the conversations we've had a good laugh, and a joke about, not about Tourette's, just about other things that are going on. Some people see neurodivergent conditions as having strengths. It's a bit Marmite love and hate, this whole concept of a superpower. Some people describe it that way. Other people say, absolutely not, this is detrimental to my life. You mentioned the pain elements, but I guess what I'm asking is, what's your reflection looking back at your life so far in terms of what Tourette's has brought you, what perspectives it's given you?
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I think actually we really need to ask people that more, just in life, don't we? Because we always focus on what's difficult, what do you struggle with, what can't you do, what are the barriers? Actually, what are the gifts, what are the strengths? And I know what you mean about this idea of superpowers, and some people hate it. They think it kind of invalidates. But actually, within Tourette's, I think there are so many strengths and skills that research actually shows us do sit beyond the general population. I think people can be really adaptable and empathetic, compassionate, resilient, and actually some unique things to Tourette's in my experience, quite quick-witted. I have a tendency, I really struggled to go to stand-up comedy shows. I love stand-up comedy, but my tics will often tick the punchline, or in some situations, an improved punchline before the comedian even has a chance to get there. And they'll just stop the show and go, there's no point now. Or what you ticked was funnier than what I was going to say, so I'm not even going to do my joke. I couldn't do that consciously, but my brain fills in gaps. People could be amazing at things like sports because they've got really quick physical reflexes. And I like this kind of the idea of what we call like a spiky profile. And kind of,
Yes.
these are our skill sets. This is the general population. This is what you do amazingly well. And these are some areas of difficulty. And as long as we are designing, environments, education spaces, workplaces around those strengths and skills, and we're avoiding as much as possible of the real difficulties or using systems to manage those, we can get the best from people. And I think my work at Tourette's Action's a lovely example of that. Most of my job role is human facing. It's leading the training, it's kind of doing that work with people, and then where possible the kind of background, the organization, the dates, the numbers, the admin side I get some support with. And in that way people get the best of me, and I don't get horrifically burnt out by having to proofread an email 93 times and still sending it with like 3 horrifically embarrassing spelling errors in it that totally change the whole underlying message of the email. So when we help people to recognize their strengths and skills, and alongside that their difficulties, then we can kind of design jobs that better work for them. And that's like the key adjustment that I'll often encourage when I'm working with employers with tics and Tourette's. What change can be done to the individual job role to enhance their natural skills and strengths, prevent that kind of risk of burnout? Because if so much of the job is your difficulty, it's not sustainable, is it? It sounds exhausting. I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
And so, other than stand-up comedy, which clearly needs to be on in your future at some point, what are your ambitions and desires for the future, Ione? What have you got your sights on?
Big question. Ruling the world? No, I can't think of anything worse. It's a terrible state. That's a lot of responsibility. I suppose I know my long-term career will kind of align with tics and Tourette's. I love working with people with tics and Tourette's, and I want to continue to do that. I'm always looking for kind of creative ways to support people. So I'm currently exploring designing a range of protective clothing to reduce tic-related pain, trying to think of quite alternative solutions to common challenges that people with this condition live with. I love traveling. That fills up my cup a lot, and I'm trying to do more of kind of balancing. I tend to give a lot to my work, so I think it's important that I explore what fills my cup outside of work. So things like theatre, travel, music, swimming, wild swimming, those sort of things really well for me. And I'm also doing some training in sensory integration therapy, and I'm really interested in exploring what that might look like for people with tics and Tourette's, and how that might be a kind of alternative.
What is that? Sensory, say that again.
Sensory integration therapy. So it's how we kind of receive, process, and integrate sensory information from our kind of 8 senses, and how that impacts what we do and how we do it and how we engage in the world. And loads of people with Tourette's have sensory sensitivities, but so do people with lots of different neurodiversities. and so do people without. So
Yeah.
spoiler, it's relevant to us all. But I would really like to explore the impact of this as a potential therapeutic intervention for
Oh,
people.
that sounds fascinating.
So I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, I do. I feel like I need a piece of that in my life. And I think, which makes me think it's an important point, isn't it, that you say, actually, sometimes a lot of the adjustments or things that we can do to help people with certain traits or conditions actually help a lot of other people as well, which is why it's so important to just have this very open mind, isn't it? Because why, back to that, why wouldn't you? If somebody says, actually, that looks really good, I think I'd benefit from that. Does it matter whether they've got the same condition or no conditions at all? It would just help them in general life.
Absolutely. More of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, let's have more of that. So that links nicely then to my final question. We, in my opinion, have spent far too long trying to change people to fit into a system that isn't designed for them. And we need to disrupt the system, not change the people. So what would your thoughts be on? Give us all some hints and tips. How can we just help disrupt the system to make it so that you feel like you belong more?
A lovely, lovely question. I suppose I think that the as long as we're working on a foundation of fact, so we're not trying to disrupt the system based on these kind of big myths and assumptions and
Mhm.
generalized statements. We're actually using a kind of slightly evidence-based approach to how we're going to do it. I think learning information is one of the most powerful tools to disruption. Being well informed about a condition or a group of people, a demographic, a characteristic, and how you can better serve them can just be incredible. Seeing people as individuals, being compassionate, being reactive, speaking up when we see things being done wrong, kind of standing up and saying, actually, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't sit right. Um, offering people change and not expecting people to beg, borrow, and steal for these kind of what should be reasonable adjustments. But yeah, knowledge is power. We did this pilot study of adults with Tourette's, and we worked with their employers, and we offered this little intervention, and it ended with us training their whole teams. So we were trying to create cultures and environments where everyone gets it, and people with tics and Tourette's are safe to be their awesome, authentic, ticky, loud, proud selves in any setting. And the outcomes were phenomenal. People said I was safe to be myself. People accepted me more. There was less conflict. Managers said, actually, we applied those adjustments across the service. We saw improvements across everyone beyond our neurodivergent colleagues. And for people with tics, some of their tics reduced because they weren't so worried about ticking and being
Mm.
shamed or embarrassed or judged for it. So if we can embed that kind of change and that knowledge on a cultural level, across the whole of a team or a service, we can make like real meaningful, sustainable change. So I think that's my non-nutshell, non-concise top tips for disrupting the system.
I love it. It's perfect, Ione. Thank you so much. Your energy is contagious. It's been fantastic speaking to you. Thank you for being so open and authentic about everything. It's been a real pleasure, and I know for a fact it will help many other people as well. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz.
Okay, take care.